The Missionary Society of St. Columban was born from the vision of one man, Father Edward Galvin. His passion and relentless dedication to that vision saw the Columbans grow into a society of over 1,100 priests from more than 10 nationalities, ministering in 20 different countries around the world. Father Galvin was ordained at St. Patrick's College in Maynooth Island, and in 1910 he took up temporary duties, working in New York. After 2 years, he was due to return to Ireland, but an encounter with a missionary priest led him instead to Shanghai, China, in February of 1912. Galvin was shocked by what he saw there, the sheer numbers of people, many of whom were living in poverty and with little knowledge of the gospel, was staggering. He threw himself into the challenge, working tirelessly with the poor and baptizing hundreds of new supporters into the church. But after 4 years, he realized that the efforts of one man would be futile. So in 1916, he decided to return to Ireland to request assistance and support. Back in Ireland, Galvin met Father John Blowick, a young professor at Maynooth. If Galvin was the heart, then Blowick was the brains, and when the two met, they formed a formidable team. Together, they set about laying the foundations to establish a mission house or college to supply priests for work in China. It did not take long to find others who embraced their vision, and on June 29, 1918, the new society officially took the name of St. Columban's Foreign Mission Society in honour of Ireland's greatest missionary, St. Columban.
I think it was a most outrageous kind of thing. Like they were so confident that they were going to convert China. I mean, it's just a great tribute to the vision of the dreams of those men.
Against all odds, it was extraordinary that an Irish missionary group was founded to preach the gospel in China.
It's part of the Irish tradition, I think, is to be a missionary, and they would be sent to China or Korea or Japan, and it was often for life in those days. They would leave their family before they were 20 and they'd be gone for life.
The voice of Christ hath roused us from our sleeping.
Galvin led the first group of 12 into China in 1920, while Blowick stayed on in Ireland to build up the society.
With the strains of the St. Columban Mission song ringing in our ears, we are on board ship for China with the first 12 Columban Fathers. We have left the Golden Gate of California far behind and are in mid-Pacific. We see Father Tierney playing chess and Father Leonard playing dominoes, unmindful of the fact that shortly they will give their lives in the cause of the Master.
You are not here to convert the Chinese, you are here to make yourselves available to God.
Father Galvin instructed the early missionaries arriving in China.
I think people just wanted to help. I think they wanted to be missionary pastors overseas for people who weren't as advantaged as we were.
All these young guys with all this enthusiasm and energy will get out there and change the world.
Young and keen, they started work in China, but the political turmoil of the 1920s made life difficult for those early missionaries. Anti-foreign sentiment swept the country, and priests and nuns were often abused and insulted when they appeared in public. Over the following years, China suffered many tragedies: floods, famine, epidemics of cholera, typhoid and malaria, as well as war and persecution, all of which the Columbans endured. Through World War II, the Japanese invasion and Civil War, Edward Galvin, by now a bishop, was dubbed the most bombed bishop in the world. Finally, in 1952, Galvin was expelled from the country, and by 1954, every one of the 146 Columbans serving in China were banned forever. 40 years of heroic missionary service had ended. Just 2 years later, death came quietly for this great missionary. But his vision of establishing a missionary society had not just been realized, it had already gone far beyond what he could have ever imagined.
We were forced out of China, and slowly Rome also asked us to take on different missions. So we went to the Philippines, we went to Burma, we went to Korea. After the war we went to Japan. Then 50s we went to Fiji and then to South America. And since then we've gone to Taiwan, back to China now, and also to Pakistan.
Father Galvin was to be just the first of many Columbans who put their lives in the hands of God, and with the spirit of adventure, which typified the missionary's character, headed out into foreign lands.
I was ordained in 67 and so finished in the seminary in that year, and I took a boat from Sydney to Panama and flew from Panama to Lima. I began parish work there in the parish of San Martin de Porres in Lima in about August or September 1968.
I can remember being really impressed with one of the mission posters that was prepared in the States about 20 years ago, and it happened to have an elderly lady on the side of a hill in the Andes Mountains of Peru, and it's the quote of somebody that says, the first task of a missionary is to take off their shoes or their sandals because they're standing on holy ground, entering into another culture. And I think, my experience as a Columban, and speaking of the experience in Peru, the Columbans have done that.
As missionaries, Columbans are called to be deeply involved on a personal level with the people they share their lives with. Father Kevin Mullins, a Columban missionary, spent 22 years in Chile before moving to Juarez, Mexico. Father Kevin has made his own unique contribution to the parish of Inapra, baptizing nearly 50 baby Kevins in the last 5 years alone.
The parents thought he was going to have a little girl born. But then he was born, so they called him Kevin. So he's going to be real smart and intelligent and good looking anyway. Won't you?
Father Bill Morton, another Columban priest, gave his life to God 22 years ago.
Really, today, we discover the person of Jesus Christ in the poor and with the poor. And so I really, in a way, for the sake of my own soul, for the sake of my own spiritual development, I thought I really need to have that experience of being with people who are at the edge. And here I'm working with these people who live from one day to the next. And like when they say the Our Father, give us this day our daily bread, the one possibility for them is that they won't get their daily bread, that they will really be hungry. So when they pray, it's like they exercise a faith muscle that becomes kind of weak in us.
By the 70s, the Columbans had more than 1,100 priests and lay missionaries scattered around the remote corners of the world, giving spiritual and physical care to the impoverished, sick, and persecuted people.
We were given places that were tough. We were given places that had no one. We were given places that they didn't, it was just sort of, there was nothing, no infrastructure, nothing there at all. And we were basically builders first in there, other religious orders, because who they are, they went in there and they established, they set down roots and they held places and bought places. We never bought places.
But a lot of our work, I think we were aiming to hand on a lot to what we were doing. I think our main work is to make ourselves redundant, get ourselves to a position where we're not needed.
I think our job is to be with people, to share our faith, to encourage people. And each and every country demands a different response because of the culture. But to be and walk with people.
Mr. and Mrs. Bell are veterinarians. Veterinarians are doctors who care for animals and help them stay strong and healthy. Mr. and Mrs. Bell are also missionaries. You don't have to be a priest or a sister to be a missionary.
The Columbans have always worked in cooperation with lay people, right from the very beginning in China. So the priest was a little bit more like the conductor of an orchestra rather than sort of being a one-man band.
They tend to look at the situation where they are and say, well, what's needed here, you know, and not just bring in what they think they want to bring in, but just arrive and then see what's needed. I mean, P.J. McGlinchey, his brief was to sort of set up a church in Hallam, Jeju Island. Well, he looked around and saw people starving and unable to even feed themselves, and he thought, well, they don't need a church, they need some way of being able to feed themselves and their family. And he said, when these people are a church, they'll build a church. He said, it's not about building churches, it's about building the church as in the people of God, and then they'll build themselves a church, which they did.
Toma, Christe Amen.
Yeah, they seem to be able to be a catalyst to get things happening.
As a sign of mission going full circle, Columbans ordained in recent years come from countries that were once the site of their missions.
This weekend has been special because it's the first time we've had a young man ordained to priesthood here in this parish of Bar. So it's very special to us.
That once we were Irish, and then surprisingly some Americans, Australians and New Zealanders and even a few Englishmen wanted to join. But now we've got people from Korea and the Philippines and Peru and Chile and Fiji. We sort of reflect the face of the church.
In a world changing so fast, the original vision of Father Galvin has continued to change along with it. The Columbans now offer a unique link between us and other cultures from around the world.
One of the great things about the society is that we encompass, or we kind of embody, some of the great questions of the world today. We embody the questions of poverty and injustice and violence. But we also now want to be able to work for a just world, a sustainable world, a world where there's no enmity because of religion or culture.
Most of the countries where we work now, the church is reasonably well established. I think the emphasis now is for the Columbans to be a bridge, a facilitator. Every group, I believe, has to reinvent itself. Always be considering reconsidering what its focus and aims are.
The original aim of the Columbans to spread the good news remains, but each country now presents its own challenges. From social justice issues, poverty and ecological problems, to Muslim and Christian dialogue, the Columbans are still heavily involved at a local level, providing support for their people and continuing to cross boundaries of country, language and culture.
Well, the Columban criteria for mission is to cross the boundaries of race, language and culture and religion. Well, those criteria exist now in many of our communities, in the home countries like Australia and Britain and in Ireland where many of us are now working, as missionaries. And I feel just as much on mission here as I ever did in the Philippines in many ways. Very different. And I think that's one of the great challenges of mission that we have today.
The Columbans have faced many challenges since their original struggles in China. For over 80 years, they've worked tirelessly establishing a remarkable infrastructure and earning the respect of local peoples. They bring understanding and knowledge in a time of fear and confusion.
I would regard our legacy in most countries as that we went there and we stayed there. We weren't fly-by-nights. We didn't just come in and enrich ourselves and get out. We've stayed and we've been with the people.
I don't think anybody has ever gained materially from being a Columban. There was no advantage in becoming a Columban other than this is what you really want to spend your life doing. People knew we were there to assist them rather than to do good for ourselves. Even though, there is the cynical thing that they say missionaries go to places to do good and did well. But I don't think we ever really did well. I think we did good.